Yesterday, the Labour Party confirmed that it will instruct its MPs to vote against the government's EU withdrawal bill in the Commons next week. That's the legislation which transfers existing European law into British law. So is Labour's position on Brexit now clear? Let's take a look at what some of the party's senior figures have said about the single market since the referendum.
The damage that would be done to our economy by pulling out of the single market at this time could be substantial.
We wouldn't want to leave membership of the single market.
Our aim is to have a tariff-free trade access to Europe. I think we should put it in those terms rather than anything else at this stage.
I think people will interpret membership of the single market as not respecting that referendum.
You want to end up with the same benefits, but you're definitely leaving.
No, what we've said is it's an open question.
So the Labour position is this, is we leave the European Union. As leaving the European Union, it means we need to leave the single market.
We want to retain the benefits that we currently have as part of the customs union and the single market. Now, whether that's inside or outside, that's a moot point.
To be absolutely crystal clear, we leave the single European market because we leave the EU.
The two things are inextricably
So we have to leave
linked.
the single market.
Yes. What we've said is the transitional period, i.e. from March 2019 until we get to a new and final deal, will be within a customs union and within the single market.
We think that being part of the customs union and the single market is important in those transitional times because that's the way you protect jobs and the economy, and it might be a permanent outcome of the negotiations.
It's not a U-turn, it's a development of our policy.
Well, I hope that was all completely crystal clear. Owen Smith, how long will it be before Labour's Brexit position changes again?
I think our Brexit position, I think that was slightly unfair.
What was unfair?
I think it was mixing up talking about the transitional period that will exist post-March 2019 and through to the point of there being a final agreement.
Right, hang on.
And the point after the final agreement. And I think the clear policy from us right now is that between March 2019 and the final agreement on what the relationship with the European Union is post-Brexit, we would want to retain membership of the single market and a customs union.
Right.
Because that's the least disadvantageous, most certain thing for British industry and British jobs.
But it's a changing position, isn't it? I mean, let's just recap. Lots of noises from Labour after the referendum about remaining in the single market. Then Labour said, well, we'll have to leave the single market to respect the referendum result. Some of the shadow cabinet suggested you could still be members. Jeremy Corbyn then said Britain definitely had to leave. Now Keir Starmer has committed, as you've said, to stay in the single market during the transition. And Tom Watson, the deputy leader, says that could be permanent. You've gone sort of full circle.
Well, I've been consistent throughout this period.
But your party hasn't.
No, I think the key thing to remember is that the Labour Party collectively voted to invoke Article 50, thereby accepting that we are leaving the European Union in March 2019.
No, except you're saying we're going to stay in the single market and that the UK is going to stay in the customs union.
No, we're saying that we're going to stay in the single market and a customs union during the transitional period, which will run from March 2019 through to the point at which a final agreement.
All right.
And that is the sensible grown-up thing to do, because where the Tories, I think, are making a problem for the country, for industry, for jobs, for people who rely on a decent economy here, is the uncertainty that now pertains, because they're trying to get an absolute guaranteed bespoke transitional set of arrangements in place, and everybody can see who's been watching these negotiations, Robin included, that there's no prospect.
OK, what happens after what happens after the transition period? What should happen then, according to Labour?
Well, I think then you've got to see what the best possible outcome can be. That gives us both the same benefits that we currently enjoy within the single market and the customs union.
Do you agree with Tom Watson that Labour would suggest, or might suggest, permanently remaining in the single market?
Well, I think what Tom was saying was exactly consonant with what Keir has said, which is it could be that what we end up with is a deal which looks exactly like staying in the single market.
Right, including keeping free...
Or having, as I think Keir said in
well,
the
let's just be clear to people.
Well,
so there is a situation, just because it's confusing, listening to all the various scenarios that could unfold.
A bit more confusing than it is, Joe.
So Keir Starmer has said that Labour wants to stay in the single market and the customs union during transition.
Yeah.
You are now saying Tom Watson is consistent with what he says about perhaps a permanent position within the single market beyond the transition. Does that include retaining freedom of movement?
Well, to be clear, Keir said in the article that he wrote for The Observer last week that beyond the transitional arrangements, we still want the same benefits as the government has promised us that we currently enjoy within the single market. And therefore, that might mean that the deal we negotiate with the EU looks very similar, is frankly tantamount to remaining within the single market.
So could freedom of movement continue in your eyes beyond
Well, I said
March
a moment
2019?
ago, I think the government has conceded in this leaked report today that they accept there is going to be a degree of freedom of movement, that we're not going to shift to ending all movement between the European Union and the UK.
And you would like to see that continue
But there
too?
may be extra elements to it.
Right. Are you still in favour of a second referendum?
Well, I think that leaving the European Union is going to be bad for our economy, and the only way in which we could ever overturn that is if there were a further public vote. I don't see any real public appetite for that, although I do see some change in people's perception of how they were lied to during the Brexit referendum. I think more and more people, even those who voted Brexit, realise that they were told a pack of fibs.
And we're going to have to leave it there.